Um, I was very surprised, very pleasantly surprised when I pulled up and found absolutely no parking. Alhamdulillah. It's very wonderful to see the masjid on a Friday night this full and full with a lot of young faces. There were some people, I won't mention their names, who told me to expect this because marriage is always a hot topic. I didn't think it was this hot, but alhamdulillah.
It's freezing, Sheikh. It's not.
Inshallah. And it's a cold night. So inshallah, we start by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify all of our intentions tonight, inshallah.
Ameen.
We ask that He surround this gathering with His angels, and that this be a gathering of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He rewards us all for coming together to learn about His religion, and to learn about a process that the Prophet ﷺ deemed was half of our iman, and really just to spend time in the masjid. Like we ask that Allah SWT accept this as a form of atikaf for us while we're here. So try to multiply the numbers of intentions that you have. This is a very wonderful, wonderful sight to see. 2 months before Ramadan, we've only ever seen these numbers really in like the hot Ramadan AMAs that are free-for-alls, mashallah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, to make this a blessed gathering, to make it a gathering of benefit, and that He allows everyone who came here tonight seeking some answers to find answers that bring us closer to Him, inshallah.
Amen.
Some basic just reminders about the way we manage these things. So we used to do the Google number. Apparently that changed. We're getting high tech, alhamdulillah. So if you scan the QR code on an app or a website called Slido, you'll be able to send in your messages or your questions anonymously through there. And people can vote up questions. So if you feel like a question is getting ignored, vote it up. If you think a question is relevant, vote it up so that we know it's of a higher priority for the audience. I am going to remind everyone though, in these AMAs we always end up with way more questions than we have time to answer. So please do not get upset or frustrated. A lot of times when I'm getting questions come in, I get the same question, and each time it comes in it's a little angrier than the time before. So let's all be patient with one another, inshallah. We will allow live questions, so if you do want to speak, raise your hand. I'm not going to necessarily call on you one by one. I'm going to have to do some managing of both. If you're going to speak, you must stay respectful. So the questions should be respectful anonymously, but definitely if you're going to speak in the masjid, please keep your question not just concise and relevant to the point, but do your best to remain as respectful as possible, inshallah. Okay. And then please, if you're in the musalla, let's all have one conversation. Do your best to stay focused with us. If you're here to hang out and you want to chat with friends, there are other places in the masjid that you can sit, or you can warm up your car, inshallah, and sit out there, but you'll be losing out on the blessing of the masjid. But let's please, while we're in this hall, try to keep it all in one place, inshallah. Before I begin and hand the mic over to Sheikh Yasser, everyone I think knows Sheikh Osama, alhamdulillah. Everyone knows Sheikh Yasser, alhamdulillah. My name is Zaid Abbasi. You don't have to know much more about me than that.
Zaid.
We do have, alhamdulillah. I don't know if she's ever spoken here today, but we do have Dr. Hanan Delgado with us for the first time. So just to give a brief introduction about her. Dr. Hanan just recently finished her PhD from Harvard University in Islamic Studies. Her doctoral work dealt directly with child custody law in the Maliki Madhab. She analyzed motherhood, parenthood, and childhood in Islamic legal discourse and in the tradition. So she is very academically she's very academically versed on the subject we're going to be discussing today, alhamdulillah. She's also married to Sheikh Yasser, and they have two wonderful, beautiful children together, and they're building their home together. So she has a lot of experience with this directly and personally as well. So we're hopeful, we're very happy to have her with us, and we're hopeful, inshallah, that we can all gain from her insights and benefit from her, inshallah. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic to Sheikh Yasser to make a few opening remarks, and then we'll start with the questions.
There's another mic over there. Just, it's on. It's on. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
You turned it off, Zaid. You turned it off. They're both linked with each other. Exactly. They're married to each other.
Allahu Akbar.
There you go.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Just before we get to the Q&A, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the genesis of this particular gathering. For those of you who saw the flyer, it's called the Meeting Point. And the spirit behind this was, it started virtual. We used to meet virtually. And the idea of the meeting point comes from the story of Sayyiduna Musa and Sayyiduna al-Khidr, which is when Sayyiduna Musa learned that there is someone more knowledgeable than him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him where he could find him, which was at the gathering point or the meeting point of the two seas, Majma'ul Bahrain. And so the response of Sayyiduna Musa was, لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبة. That I will not rest until I reach the gathering meeting point of the two seas, or that I die in that state. So the reason why we named this gathering the meeting point is in that spirit of learning, that spirit of pursuit, that spirit of recognizing for all of us, each of us here, that there is the one who knows much more than we do. And so really as a community, we have to be on a journey of learning together. And we hope to arrive, bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important that we come into a space like this with humility, with an acknowledgement that perhaps my preconceived notions or my beliefs or understandings about a given topic perhaps may be faulty, perhaps may be correct, perhaps maybe can be challenged. And so we all have to be open-minded, open-spirited, open-hearted in these spaces of talab. When we're seekers and we're genuinely seeking knowledge that will bring us happiness and relief and joy, then we do that with humility, with an open heart and an open mind, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us on the pathway of truth, and that He shows us truth for what it is, and then He blesses us with the humility to surrender to truth and to follow it, even if it goes against every single one of my visceral preconceived notions or ideas that I've been holding on to for 20, 30 years. Secondly, what I want to say in the same vein as an extension is that this space, especially when we're coming together, mashallah, really, bifadlillah, just look around you. What a beautiful community. You know, rich, full of Muslimin. I mean, I can't count how many people are in the room right now, mashallah. And so we're here with love, with care, in a spirit of community and togetherness. And so let's make sure that that spirit permeates everything we say and do. That we're coming from a place of love. And that we all want to figure out a way to live in a manner that will beget our greatest collective welfare. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And so I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala infuses the space with mahabba, with love, with care, with compassion, and with beauty. Allahumma ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.
جزاك الله خير مولانا. الله يبارك فيك ويعطيك العافية. No, that's all I got.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Some of the hot topics are getting the most likes, so they're on the top of the list. But we need to warm up a little bit. I don't want to hop in right into the hot stuff. So we'll wait a little bit on some of the more.
We're all loving each other, so even if it's
100%,
hot.
100%. It could be hot. Oh, I don't want to say that. So, Bismillah. All right, let's ask one that's difficult but not too controversial. How do you ensure a long-lasting marriage?
How do you ensure a long-lasting marriage? لقد سألت عن عظيم وإنه ليسير على من يسره الله عليه إن شاء الله. Bismillah. Yeah, I think that's a really big question, and it takes a journey along the way to figure that out. But I think there's a bunch of guidelines that can help achieve that goal. I think at the top of the list, of course, would be getting your bearings right and starting on the right path in this journey. Make sure you set your foundations in the right place. You make sure you build your relationship with the right person and with the right dynamics. And then above all of this, you make sure that that relationship is linked with a greater calling. And then of course, for us, that greater calling is Allah Azza wa Jal. When a marriage is founded, truly seeking Allah's rida, Allah Azza wa Jal will help the husband and wife through the ups and downs. And I don't think that's something that, we should take lightly. Because marriage is a long journey, and it's loaded with challenges, ups and downs, just like life is loaded with ups and downs. But there's this certain element that if found in a marriage, a lot of those things could be managed much more easily than if it wasn't present. There's an element of barakah if it enters the home, barakah, blessings. When the home is a place in which Allah Azza wa Jalla is remembered, the influence of the shaitan will be less. The problems and the natures of problems will be less amplified. And if we're both in that same pursuit of Allah's rida, then eventually whatever comes our way we'll be able to manage and figure out. And that's what I would add to that discussion. Make sure that you have your compass and your bearings on it correct, to go down a path seeking Allah's rida, founding your home upon that, because then you'll find even when there's downs, those downs will bring you closer together as husband and wife. And it's a very general question, so there's so much more to add to that, but that's what I would say.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. جزاكم الله خير for including me in this conversation. I'm happy to be with you tonight. I think I would like to add to that question that you maintain a long-lasting marriage in the same way I think that you maintain relationships with anyone else in your family, really. We live in America where so many relationships fall apart. Mother, daughter, sisters, people become estranged. They don't see each other for decades sometimes. It's very easy, in our modern culture to hear things like, stay away from toxic relationships. Stay away from those who bring you grief. And so people very easily cut off their ties, silat al-raham, their relationships. How do you maintain your family relationships with your difficult aunt, with your difficult uncle, your parent, your mother-in-law, your father-in-law? It's the same way that you maintain a relationship with your husband. I like to use this metaphor of the vertical line versus the triangle. There's a vertical line that connects me to my husband, right? Me, him. But then there's also a triangle, which is me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and my husband. So that's easy for you to remember, vertical line versus triangle. If we just have a vertical line, we are going to end up in a lot of fights, seeing things differently. We don't see eye to eye. We forget that there's anything else other than his desires and my desires, his interests and my interests. We forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we have this triangle, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we remember that even before I react to my husband, I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala up there. And then I go to him. So I think he did something unfair. If I forget that there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I immediately lash back and our problems grow. But if I fear Allah, if I have taqwa, which is really building on Sheikh Osama's answer, having taqwa of Allah, then your relationships can be much longer. The same is for your difficult relative or any other relationship. You fear Allah in how you deal with them. you are more patient, and you remember that ultimately you live with this human being as a means to grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the most important relationship that we're trying to build. And He's a means for me to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm a means for Him to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the most important relationship. And our marriage is secondary to that first most important relationship. Jazakumullah khair.
So I'm just a means, that's why I'm learning today. So Barakallahu feekum, I think that was very rich. I don't want to, add more than just to say the following. I just want to give language that perhaps hopefully is helpful. I think we have to look at marriage as an act of ibadah. Marriage as an act of worship. Because that's what it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who chose in the human condition that this is how men and women would unite. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, be conscious of the one who created you from one, and from that one He created your spouse. And so we are intrinsically connected and tied. And so this is an act of ibadah. This has an existential quality. Marriage has an existential quality, meaning that there is a deeply ukhrawi consideration. It's not just a function of how marriage is this thing of utility that allows me to have some of the pleasures and the joys of this life. Companionship, relationship, intimacy, children, etc. No, there's a far greater and more profound consideration, which is the akhirah, which is that we're all going to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment. And He is the one who gave us this capacity and these abilities to marry and have relationships, to make decisions, to be happy, sad, angry, hurtful, injurious, to be loving, caring, merciful. That is something that Allah has bestowed upon us, and He will ask us. As Dr. Zaid was saying, that there is a real question that each of us have to ask ourselves about how I'm going to choose to treat this person, how I'm going to choose to consider what the meaning behind my treatment of this person is. If it's just about me and them, it will 9 out of 10 times fail. If it is about Allah and as an act of worship, as a function of muhasabah, Allah is going to ask me about my relationships and how I dealt with them. You hear this idea of marriage is half of your faith, right? People, they struggle with this idea, they work with it. But something about this concept that's important for us to understand is the following. It is that when Allah wills, and if He wills and puts you into holy matrimony, the reason why it becomes half of your faith, because your faith is being challenged every single day in that relationship. The integrity of your faith is in question. How are you a good Muslim? Are you treating this person nicely? Because this is the person that has the most amount of volume in terms of time that you're interacting with. So how are you in terms of your akhlaq, your character, your deen, your humility, your kindness, your sacrifice, your generosity, right? All of that is in question. But if it is really a battle of wills and me, wanting, no consideration for what's pleasing to Allah, none of the prophetic values that we have inherited from the Quran and Sunnah, then there is a real question about the integrity of that relationship as a spiritual enterprise. Wallahu a'lam.
SubhanAllah.
It's bound to be a zero-sum game.
SubhanAllah. Just a small thing to add. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Half your deen. The other thing that comes to my mind is ad-deenu mu'amala. The essence of what Iman's all about is your behavior. It's supposed to manifest through behavior. And خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. In that sense, the best of you are the best of you to their families. It's the most intimate relationship, as you said. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh.
If I can press on a follow-up to that question. One of the things that happens in our society, in our community today, is language like "I'm doing it lillah" is very broad. It's very general. It can mean just about anything to any person. And so I've seen in marriages around me at times where people would argue for what may seem like a very selfish action, from the standpoint of it being more pleasing to Allah. If everyone can, if all the sisters and yeah, the brothers can also come up a little bit to make some space, but definitely the sisters, we're running out of space on the sister side. We might have to, yeah, we might have to actually.
It's time for an expansion, says Ibrahim. We got a board member right here.
Okay, let's stay together, inshallah. So the question that I'm trying to get to, what does lillah mean? But more specifically,
علي صوتك مولانا.
more specifically,
There you go.
does the religion dictate that the marriage, the actual union, matters more than the individual? Meaning, is it an inherent form of worship for either spouse or child to sacrifice something of their own because it gives more to the family as a whole? Because one of the realities that we're seeing play out today is a lot of people will define lillah as a very individualistic thing. And it's not being made, like quite often it's not stated very clearly. Does the family hold a higher position in the eyes of Allah than each individual in that family does? That's my follow-up question.
I think it's all about sacrifice. يعني I think it's all about sacrifice, and not just one-sided sacrifice. I definitely would say that. I think it's meant to be a mutual sacrifice. But I think in general in our deen, we always have this dynamic of looking for the greater benefit, the greater good. And that's why al-maslaha al-amma muqaddama ala al-maslaha al-khassa. That, even when they talk in maqasid al-sharia, greater objectives of Islamic law, the general benefit takes precedence over the specific benefit. And this is actually how they weigh pros and cons and directives and what course of action should I follow. Where is the greater benefit? And that takes a sense of selflessness to a certain extent. Sometimes you might not want to do that, especially if the other side's so selfish. But if I choose to be just as selfish as how my other half might be acting, then I'm just leading myself on a road of destruction. Allah, and that's what I'd say to that.
They tell you that you need to know yourself before you engage in a marriage process. I think you're really onto something there, Ustaz Zaid. We like to say we're doing something lillah, and that it's important for me to be on this pursuit lillah. So you should not stand in the way of my pursuit lillah. I think we all have to engage in some, self-examination of whether what we're doing, what we have been pursuing is actually lillah. For me, an easy test is whether you're willing to leave it lillah. When I met Sheikh Yasser, I was in my first year of the PhD program, and I had been a very ambitious student up until that point. During my undergrad, I did my master's at NYU, my undergrad in Egypt, and I was very driven, and I knew where I was going, and I said, Brother Yasser, I want to do this and this and this lillah, and I want to become this and this and this lillah. And he said, mashallah, if it's lillah, I will support you 100%. But, at the same time, at that moment, it was a process of self-examination, and I thought, okay, I want to do all these things lillah, but would I do something radically different lillah? I was a very driven and ambitious, and I had all these dreams. And I said, if this is actually lillah, and Allah actually wanted me, for example, to stay home and take care of my family, maybe take care of my elderly parents, would I be equally excited? It's lillah. If it's lillah, it's lillah. If that is actually, the end goal, the means don't matter. And in my heart, I was like, I don't know if I'm excited about that. So is it really lillah, or is it for my nafs? that I want this and I want that and I want that. And again, we're not saying don't have dreams and don't have pursuits, you know. It's more complicated than that. I'm just saying, I'm just talking about being real. And when I advise young women, I mostly talk to women, I haven't taught men for the most part. I really think one of the recipes for success in marriage is flexibility. If you are set on one thing and it looks one way, either the other person is going to have to bend over for you, or it's not going to work. When in reality, there are so many different ways to be happy and fulfilled, and Allah doesn't ask much of us. So if you don't have some flexibility, I am not sure, Sheikh Yasser, Sheikh Osama, how that's going to work. I mean, marriage involves two people, right? If it's you know, and by the way, they tell you if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I was going fast.
MashaAllah.
You know, I was going fast, I was going alone, I was doing it my way. And then the PhD is supposed to end in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years max. Guess how many years it took me to finish my PhD? 11.
MashaAllah.
I just graduated last May.
Allahu Akbar.
Takbir, takbir, takbir.
Takbir. Allahu Akbar.
Last May I graduated and I told my son Zaid, who's 7 here, that I have been in school since I was 4 years old. And he couldn't understand how I've been in school for so many years. I said, I was still a student, Zaid. How? It took 11 years because other things took priority.
Yes, salam.
Other things took priority. I mean, I had a family now. You know, in-laws, Amu Fikri, had to be visited in New Jersey. We had to connect with his family. We had to connect with my family. I can't say, oh, I have exams, we can't go to my niece's Eid Salah. You have to travel, you have to go, you have to put family first. I'm not doing this alone anymore, so I can't go fast. But if you're not flexible, things can break. It's a rule, right? Anything that is rigid will break.
MashaAllah. I love that.
Barakallahu fiki. You know, I just, Sheikh Osama and Dr. Zaid have been speaking. You know, what comes to mind is this term, lillah, has, for all intents and purposes, become a rubber stamp that we kind of just like to put on when we've cooked the idea, we've kind of pursued our pursuit, we've gone full throttle, if you will, and then we say, oh yeah, by the way, lillah, right? And so to answer the question, the idea of lillah is a reality that is all-encompassing. It's something, if I say, if I'm doing something for the sake of Allah, then the first step is actually going to Allah and asking a simple question. Ya Allah, what do you prefer me to do? What do you want me to do that will dispose me as the best possible servant to you? That is what lillah sincerely means. It is that Allah, it is for Allah, but also by Allah. For Allah, by Allah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us this Quran and He gave us the beautiful messengership of Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam that is chock full of detailed guidance on the how-to. We have our tradition preserved for us, the mechanism, the way of being. So we don't have to sidestep all of that and then just say, well, I'm a modern person, I do my thing, you know, I have this figured out, I'm on this journey, you know, as the doctor was saying that, you know, I'm kind of moving fast, full-fledged, without question. No, Islam teaches us to stop and sincerely ask, who informed this decision? What was it genuinely motivated by? What was I pursuing in the first place? This career, this education, whatever the case may be. So I think lillah is a very involved process in the beginning, all throughout, and at the end. Wallahu a'lam.
SubhanAllah.
Barakallahu feekum. I do want to say one thing so that nobody. I'm a little colored here by like all the conversations that have happened, especially around this masjid over the last like 6 months. So I want to make sure nothing is misunderstood. My question was not meant to have Dr. Hanan say what she said specifically to the sisters, so no one misunderstands that.
What conversations are you talking about?
I'm going to say what I want to say very clearly right now.
No, I'm curious.
So to the brothers, I would say a lot of what Dr. Hanan, actually everything Dr. Hanan said applies just as much to us. And I can say this with complete honesty, that to this day, in my own marriage, I have to revisit just how much time I'm going to devote to my own personal goals. And this is something that I have to negotiate over and over and over again, because sometimes I have a goal that I've set out to do, whether it be some business goal or some other personal goal that I have, some goal in the community. And then when I come to speak to my wife and we assess the state of our family and what we want our family to be and how we want our kids to grow up, some of my goals have to be renegotiated. I'm not going to be able to devote as much time as I thought I could. Or sometimes I thought I can do this with a lot less time needed, but in reality it's just a very time-consuming, energy-consuming, mind-consuming thing. And if I give too much of myself to this thing, whether it be career or something else, my family will suffer, my kids will suffer. And as we're going to have to get into now in some of the most popular questions that are coming up, you know, we as men have a responsibility in the household that is very weighty, and our sisters have very weighty responsibilities in the household, and so we all have to negotiate these personal goals quite a bit. That's why I said what I said. Dr. Hanan gave a wonderful response that was very articulate, very profound, but she spoke from the position of the woman that she is, and I didn't want it to be misunderstood that she was saying that just to women. That also is the same exact message that we as men have to take away. Sometimes we have to renegotiate our own personal goals because the family has to take a higher value at times, because that is our bigger responsibility.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. You know, I think one thought that came to my mind was, you know, I hope that if anything, one of the takeaways from this type of gathering, from anyone who's not in the reality of marriage yet, is that it's always a give and take. There's always things that you're going to have to negotiate. There's not a single person, by the way, who can ever make the claim that they have everything figured out before marriage and doesn't have to make absolutely any adjustments. No, there's only one type of person who's one who doesn't have to make any or won't make any adjustments. That's a person who is absolutely set in their ways, has no flexibility. The process of marriage is something that always needs redirection, back and forth, reassessment of things, maybe perhaps taking certain things back and reconsidering them. Maybe I shouldn't have acted this way. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. You know, and I think, you know, this discussion really gives that practical element to it. And I do want to say one other thing. You know, Dr. Zaid joining us today actually was a big blessing, and it came about by one of the suggestions from one of the sisters, and that is, you know, to have sort of a diverse, you know, speaker presence, that we get more perspectives on things from both the side of the females and from the male side. And I really think it's working out amazingly. And Sheikh Yasir and Dr. Zaid, if you guys don't mind, I hope this is not the last time we get the blessings of your presence in the masjid, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Please, go right ahead.
Yeah, I want to add something there. I think we're probably going to get more into this because this is the crux of the issue in many ways. Flexibility and how do you get married when we have other pursuits at the same time. I want to say that I was a little bit set on my ways when I was in my undergrad and my master's years. I was pretty set in my ways. I mean, there's a way in which you get far, right? Which is by being set in your ways and just pursuing it. And I think women, mashallah, seem to be very, very good at, you know, succeeding academically and being go-getters and knowing where we're going. And there are, statistically speaking now, we know that women are, you know, what is it called? Like graduating at higher numbers than men, getting higher degrees more than men. You know, statistically speaking,
It's those video games.
Wallah, Allahu Alam, but we know that, mashallah, women are very good at setting a goal for themselves. We're good at sitting down, studying, getting the grades, and you know, we keep on going like, you know, that, what is the rabbit of that? Anyway, there's an ad for that.
The Energizer Bunny.
Energizer, right? And we'll keep on going. Alhamdulillah, when I was in the process of understanding that I wanted to get married, I knew that I was going to be flexible. But I was still kind of set in my ways. What I want to say, because the gender issue was brought up, I mean, very often it's said, how come women have to sacrifice so much and men don't? You know, how come and women end up staying at home and men don't? And how come women, you know, sacrifice their careers and men don't? What I want to say is that when I became willing to negotiate everything I had imagined for myself, it really was by example from Sheikh Yasser. MashaAllah, Sheikh Yasser led by example, because even as we were getting to know each other, this was not a man who was living for himself. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, rabbina yahfadho. He had gone to Al-Azhar not because it was the fashionable thing to do. He had left a lucrative career in corporate America, where he could have, you know what that path is like, economic success and so on and so forth. This was a person who was organizing his life lillah. And I could tell right away. So I was a little, embarrassed actually by how, I think, self-centered I had been, without even saying much about it, just by example, seeing how he had led his life. And this was at a time, maybe it has to be said because I don't know if anyone else had said it, but when he was coming back to the US, after having studied all those years in Egypt, there was a little bit of a trend of building a name for yourself. Starting a website on your name, Imam so-and-so, and building a social media platform for yourself. And he was not into any of that. He was not building sheikhyaserfahmi.com or going on YouTube and becoming a social media personality. He wasn't into that. He was about the khidmah and about the service, mashallah. And even now, he has a platform called Prophetic Living. It's not on his name. It doesn't have, his picture is not the profile picture of Prophetic Living. It's about Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to the brothers, you're welcome to lead by example. It's the best way to lead.
That's you guys. Yeah.
I always say it was so much easier for me to imagine, completely reimagining my life and giving up things lillah, because alhamdulillah, I had this example.
MashaAllah.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, tabarakallah.
Alhamdulillah.
I feel like we need to get Amu Fikri on the mic.
I'm Fikri's cracking jokes over here.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like after all this praise, I need Amu Fikri on the mic. يبهدلني شوية. I should have just
أصلاً مش نافع عمو فكري. مش نافع.
Give it to Ibrahim.
No, I also want to say like Amu Fikri joke, which is, and I fast every Monday and Thursday.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, keep both of our shuyukh for us, inshallah, and keep them sincere.
That was a joke. I don't actually fast every Monday. I should.
Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah.
Bismillah.
How many questions did we get through so far?
We have one. So I'm going to jump. I have to jump now. So people are really liking a few of these questions that are very broad, but you can tell what they're intending.
Yeah. You're going to mention it in the end, or
mention
the matrimonials?
Oh, Bismillah. Before I forget yet again, ICPC's matrimonial service is here. So if you are interested in looking, please seek out Sister Rana.
They're actually over here. Sister Rana and Sister Sarah.
Barakallah feekum. You can sign up with them, inshallah, and they'll...
if you guys came hoping to get married, scan the QR code. Not that QR code. There's another one. It's on the table over there. There you go.
طيب. طيب, Bismillah. Oh, there is actually another QR code.
Yeah, there's another QR code.
Okay.
But there's no guarantee, yani. You might get married, you might not. Yani.
Bismillah. Getting back to the questions now. The most popular question we have for the night: what is the role of a wife in a marriage according to Islam? And all three of you have to answer. Sheikh Yasser, this one's all you first. Everyone's liking it. Like, so there's also the flip question: what is the role of the husband? That has.
It's most likely coming from the brothers.
They just tied up. They just tied up.
What tied up? What tied up?
The two questions got tied up on the likes. Well, khalas, I asked the wife one first, so we'll start with the wife one. It was in the lead the whole night.
Sheikh Yasser, we didn't get one of your tirades tonight. Yeah.
You got all that praise, now we have to set you up.
طيب, Bismillah walhamdulillah. You know, guys, I'm not, I don't get scared about it. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. In all honesty and sincerity, I think this question of the role of the husband, the role of the wife, is an extremely critical question that we have to pose communally. Because from a practitioner standpoint, meaning someone who talks to a lot of couples who are struggling in their marriages, and I'll talk to it from that perspective,
Ya Rab.
I think foundationally there's a real problem. Because the modern period has truly obfuscated so much of what marriage is, what it means to have a harmonious space called a home, a place of sakina, because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that this whole enterprise can result in, litaskunu ilayha, so that you find sakina, you find tranquility. Hunna libasun lakum wa antum libasun lahun. You are a garment for them and they are a garment for you. And that's a very intimate Quranic representation of the role of a husband and the role of the wife. It is one of libas. And libas is a powerful metaphor for tasattur, for covering, for protection, for avoiding and averting the gazes of others. So you have this disposition of really overlooking and overseeing the welfare of your space and your home. You feel a deep sense of duty and responsibility to this space. So I think the framing of this question is absolutely critical, because if the framing of this question is about us versus them, the greatest problem that I see at the outset when coming into the space of having this conversation is that it is far more a corporatized model than a spiritual religious journey. What I mean by that is it's like a man and a woman come in with their little briefcase, slam it down on the table, let's negotiate, right? And somehow people assume that that's what's going to ensure my greatest welfare. Let's negotiate because I have a list of demands and needs, you have, and we're going to negotiate. And that's how it plays out. And there's a lot of lost opportunities in that regard. Now, the problem is that even if you don't even do that crass form of consideration and you just kind of jump into a marriage, that plays out but a far more nasty way during the marriage. Because I have a whole host of expectations, wants, aspirations, desires, motivations as a man, as a woman, and so I'm pursuing them, and then it just becomes a sheer battle of wills. It becomes very Darwinian, like survival of the fittest, right? And who's going to fall first, right? So as I said in my khutbah today, although it wasn't in the ICPC paradigm, I gave a khutbah in Bridgewater, New Jersey, but I was saying that unfortunately I see a lot of marriages crumbling, and unfortunately I'm seeing younger marriages unnecessarily falling apart. When I get into the weeds of the problems and understand what's actually happening, I'll be sincere and honest, and wallahi this is coming from a place of love, very superficial. They're not real identifiably toxic, violent, injurious problems. They are very nafsani, very self-centered, very self-desirous. It's basically, I'm not able to accomplish my wants and desires in this space, and so the marriage falls apart. So I just want to indicate that this is not a corporate negotiation. This is not a merger and acquisition of two corporations, right? No. This is not what it is. We are libas for one another, right? المؤمنون والمؤمنات بعضهم أولياء بعض. That's how Allah describes us, that we are awliya of one another. A wali of someone is an intimate caretaker, someone who honors, someone who loves, someone who respects, right? So I just, before we get into the weeds and the details of how this, perhaps conversation can unfold, I really have to emphasize this spiritual framing. Because if we lose sight of this framing, I think we lose sight of the whole enterprise, really, right? Because it just becomes very crass and it becomes very materialistic. Okay, you cook, you clean, you this, you that, let's put an Excel sheet, that kind of like very, it's very profane in nature, right? Assuming that that is the most critical thing. So sometimes, you can really, when you put things on this like administrative level, when you assume that the welfare of the relationship boils down to how things are run administratively, then you have a problem, right? Because, that Excel sheet or that administrative quality to it is not what ensures a successful, meaningful, beautiful relationship. Wallahu alam. That's my introduction. No tirades, Maulana Sheikh Hussain.
Exactly. No, Sheikh Yasser, this was beautiful.
I have to push back on that.
Hold on. Before you pass on the mic, you still haven't.
عايز أقول حاجة. We're talking about attitudes to the question. Attitudes to the question. We didn't answer the question yet. We know that. But the attitudes to the question are actually even more important than the question itself, to be honest with you. Jazakallah khair, Maulana Sheikh Yasser. There is one thing I wanted to add to the attitude towards the question, and that is, look, it would be very concerning if each side is looking at this question through the lens of how it applies to the other. Really, the way that this type of question should be handled is introspectively. Really, to be honest with you, anyone who's really looking for success in their marriage should seek to be more introspective than to deflect whatever's going on the other side. We should be very careful and cognizant of that, brothers and sisters, because this is exactly what causes a sense of selflessness to be depleted in a relationship. It's so critical that husbands and wives preserve a sense of selflessness between each other, in the sense that I'm really caring about my other's well-being before I'm considering my own. If we do that, then an ihsan is maintained between husband and wife, that it'll leave room for love. Because brothers and sisters, when it becomes a very selfish bid, like Sheikh Yasser was describing, each person is going to hold to their own guns. No, I'm not going to do this. She's not doing that. She's not taking care of my rights. Why should I do anything for her? Right? And then it just spirals until it destroys both of them and everyone around them. That's just one thing I wanted to say. Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm having some cough, so Bismillah. Hopefully I can continue with this. I just had some candy, inshallah helps. I'm not a sheikh, so inshallah I can let the sheikh answer the fiqh of what it means to be a wife. I think as I'm growing older and my kids are getting older, the question of what is my role as a wife is becoming more about me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now I am more curious about what is my role as a wife, because I am becoming more and more conscious of how short life is. I'll disclose my age. I'm nearing 40. And I think it's so true when we learned that the Sahaba used to buckle up when they reached the age of 40. Sahamu Fikri? Right. And subhanAllah,
That's her religious authority.
and it's so true, subhanAllah, as I am nearing 40, I feel like my life is almost like khalas, you know, I'm almost, I know, sorry, I don't want to be dark or anything, but I really feel death near. I want to say that. I actually have started to feel death very near. I think we have very few years left. There's something about reaching 40, I don't know what it is, but it's getting real that soon we're going to have to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Life goes by very quickly. And now my question in my relationship with my husband is, what do I need to fulfill so I can be in peace with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's not really about this person as much as it is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know how much longer we're going to be around. But I have eternity. I like when Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, by the way, I like to listen to him. He says every second, but I prefer listening to Sheikh Yasser. And in like third, fourth place, I like to listen to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
You're blushing.
He likes to say that at every second of our lives, we are at the gates of eternity. Every breath that you take, all of you, all of us, we are at the gates of eternity. Think about that. Subhanallah. We really can be walking out, driving home, and that's it for us. And then we have billions and billions and billions and billions of years. And this will be over. It's not a joke. And I really have started to feel that it's not a joke. And I don't have any more time to waste. And I feel like I've wasted a lot of time. And so, as a wife, I appreciate what Sheikh Osama is saying. This is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. The shape and structure that my marriage takes, it can take many different shapes. We can organize things in many different ways at home. Whether he leads or he doesn't lead, whether I follow or I don't follow, these are very organizational type of questions. They're not essential or existential. How we organize a marriage, it's simply about how we organize a little company. Think about a marriage as you would as a tiny little company somewhere. Those of you who are aware of how companies work, there's a structure, there's a hierarchy, there's a process of this goes to that person, that goes to that person, and the company runs and it makes decisions and it produces products. And the same is, with a marriage. There is a structure of how it's organized. Unfortunately, I think when we hear, for example, that men have a leadership role in a marriage, right? So oftentimes, we internalize that as essential and existential of what does that mean for me as a woman. And it is seen as sometimes, I think sometimes it's experienced as belittling or something like that, when in reality, again, it's just organizational of who is going to lead this ship somewhere meaningful. So I just want to put that into context out there. And can I add another thing just also for context? Basically, you can have two types of marriage nowadays, okay? It seems that you can have a very modern, very egalitarian, very equal partnership in a marriage, or you can have a traditional kind of marriage where the husband is the primary breadwinner and where he's the leader of the household. Those are basically two models that you have out there, right? The idea of the partnership, equal partnership, is very appealing. It's very appealing because, we're partners, we're equals, we're going to do this thing together. Why should one person lead? It's not necessary. It's very, I found it appealing definitely in my early 20s, like the partnership. No one has the last word necessarily. And then equal responsibilities in the household. Why should we separate things by gender role? It should be fluid, it should be negotiable. And then I was studying this model of marriage, which is very popular out there. And, you know, it has to be taken to its logical conclusion. One day you're going to have children, right? And you're still you're going to want to have this negotiable model where, you know, there are no set rules of who's supposed to be doing what. You know, maybe I work, maybe you work. Who says that you're the breadwinner? Maybe we're both breadwinners. We're equal, right? And so what ends up happening in this, you know, trendy type of marriage is that you give birth. Because, by the way, before you introduce children, it's one thing. But actually, once you have children, it's a different story. In many of these modern equal marriages, once you introduce children into the equation, very often women have to go back to work within 4 weeks. What do they have, maternity leave, 4 weeks? Okay. Motherhood brings you this nuclear bomb of new information and data and emotions that you could have never have foreseen. It's a shock. To become a mother is a shock. You never would have imagined that you would love a human being more than you love yourself. You would have never imagined that you would begin to question your pursuits because now there's this tiny, beautiful human being who's so dependent on you.
SubhanAllah.
And he only recognizes you at birth, doesn't want to be around anyone else, only recognizes your smell, wants to be around you. The only place where he feels safe is at your chest. And then you're told you have to go back to work in 3-4 weeks. Why? I mean, he has to go back to work, so why don't you have to go back to work? Find a babysitter. Put him in childcare. You're equal, right? He's earning, you're earning. Okay, I'll give you 4 weeks so that your body recovers. But, you know, you have to work, he has to work. I mean, if you actually are going to have, and let me know if I'm going too long.
We're enjoying it. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, I just have a little bit of a cough. You have to go back to work. You are devastated because you don't want to hand your child to a total stranger. Okay, maybe your husband, you know, he's like, you know, about egalitarianism and we're equals and we're partners and why should he be the breadwinner? We're equals, right? Maybe he'll give you 2 months. Maybe he'll give you 3 months. Maybe he'll give you 4 months. And then maybe the comments are going to start of like, when are you going back to work? What, am I going to shoulder all the financial responsibilities of this household? That's not what we signed up for. I work, you work. This happens in many, many households. I come from academia, surrounded by, you know, many, many situations where women had to go back to work right away. It was not an option. Why wouldn't they have to contribute? And they're made to feel guilty by men if they don't financially contribute, because that was the initial arrangement. So I want to say, and by the way, I also suppose that both of them have flexible work schedules and both of them end up caring for the child while working. But both of them still have jobs, right? So who's going to care? Who's going to do the bulk of childcare? 50-50. I actually know, I mean, if you're equal, right? I actually know of a couple who, when the baby was a toddler, she created an Excel sheet with duties and responsibilities towards the child by hour of who's supposed to be responsible for the baby.
Allahu Akbar.
She wanted to make sure that it was 50-50, right? And they got divorced. Be surprised. And the reason why they got divorced, wallahu alam, I mean, at least this is one of the things she mentioned. She said that on one occasion she was sick. So she didn't care for the toddler for 3 days. So he cared for the toddler for 3 days, or however many days. And then she said, when I recovered, he expected me to make up for my days
Qada.
that I had not showed up for my duties. And she was, you know, how, you know, dare he wants me to make up for the 3 days that I was sick. You know what? You know, forget about this. I'm out. He was like, hey, it's fair. I have to work as well. Like I got 3 days. You get to take the baby for 3 days. What do you think that turns the child into, by the way? A chore.
SubhanAllah.
An annoying chore. This is how we're coming to view children. passing it on. No, you do it. No, I do it. No, you do it. No, I do it. If I'm that toddler, I'm like, why did you bring me to this world in the first place? Thank you for, taking care of me. Like, this is not what I asked for. So, what I just want to say, if we are enamored by the egalitarian partnership idea where no one leads and it's all equal, take it to its logical consequence of when children are brought into the equation. Now, in a traditional marriage model, you have one leader who's a provider. It's not her responsibility to provide for that home. Yes, she may work while it makes sense. But when the child is born, she has the full freedom to remain with the children and to care for them. And what a relief. What a relief. And by the way, there's no such thing as having everything. Of course, everything is going to entail sacrifice. But the security and the stability of an Islamic traditional marriage is unparalleled. And I know that sometimes as a wife, you feel like you may be missing out. For example, if you stay home and you take care of your children, you may feel like you're missing out. And that's a whole other conversation that we need to touch upon, which has to do with happiness and our expectations. But I just wanted to give this very broad sketch of let's be critical about what the options are out there before we sit Islam on the chair and we interrogate everything we like and don't like. Actually, it's more complicated than that.
No, I was going to say, type Bismillah. So just from a, if we're going to invoke the religious perspective, right? There's a question? Yeah.
Yeah, certainly I think cultures can impose all sorts of expectations on women that can be suffocating, for sure. I think Islam allows you to lead a rather simple life, that sometimes we overly complicate with culture. I think there are so many examples of that, but I don't know, maybe you have something specific in mind.
If I can, no. I appreciate the comment and the question. I think it's a very pertinent one to this discussion. What I was going to ask was, I was going to re-ask the question. Barakallah feeki, Dr. Hanan. Everything you said was riveting, and I mean that sincerely. But I did want to then double back on the question of what is the actual role of a wife, and inshallah afterwards we'll answer the question, what is the actual role of a husband? And I say that because I think everything you said is very true. And in fact, in my experience with the community, a lot of people's expectation coming into marriage, both positive and negative. So people who come in saying, I want my relationship to look a certain way, are imagining it a lot of times the way they saw their parents. And we have the reverse. I saw my parents and I hated it. And so I don't want my marriage to be like that either. And a lot of times you get a comment like what you just made. Well, that wasn't really Islam, that was culture. And I'm not sure we're always, us ourselves, I'm not sure we're always very clear on what was culture and what was Islam. And so I think answering the question directly will help clarify some of those differences. Wallahu a'lam. So if I can put it back to the shuyukh to answer the question.
So I think, to answer this question and framing it from within the Islamic frame, we have to look at some of the essential scriptures that we have in this regard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the specific roles and responsibilities and duties. He says things like الرجال قوامون على النساء, that men have qiwama over women. What that means, for all intents and purposes, is that there is a type of responsibility and authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon the man over the woman in this space. Qiwama connotes that, authority and responsibility. Now, what we have to understand is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is factoring for the human condition, meaning that we have to actually govern our affairs meaningfully. We need to actually have a ship that can sail. So there is a steering wheel and there's someone who's moving that steering wheel in a direction. Now, men and women can compete about competency and who's more competent and who's not and whatever until the end of time. And that's what's happening in the public sphere today. There's this massive battle of the sexes, which is who's more competent, who's smarter, who's more capable, and it's become very subjective, and it's just warfare at this point. It's a bloodbath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually resolved that issue. When it comes to the hierarchy of the home, the man does have seniority and authority. Now, you ask yourself, why? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing that for any reason to demean women, to insult or belittle women? No. Perhaps, yes, in a liberal, secular, humanist paradigm, where the human being is the center of existence, we don't like any type of authority. we want it to be like, we want it to be a free-for-all. Like I get to assert myself, and I get to the top of the heap. I can be the president. I can be this. So why should I accept a lesser role, quote unquote, in the home? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resolves that question. Why? Because on the day of judgment, the principal individual who will be asked and who will be held accountable on the day of judgment for the affairs of the home, principally speaking, will be the man. Because he has qiwama. Sanctioned by who? By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By the way, this is not some sort of like honorific thing. Like Allah's not saying like, oh, Ya Zayd, King Zayd. No. It's not an honorific thing. This is like, you have a gargantuan responsibilities on your shoulder now. You have to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and speak to this family that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon you. That's why in the hadith, there's an order to the hadith of ri'ayah. The famous hadith of kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'ayati. This is a very seminal hadith in this regard, where the Prophet ﷺ says, all of you are shepherds and all of you are responsible for your flock. What does he say, sallallahu alayhi wasallam? After he finishes kind of the previous categories, then when he gets into marriage, men and women, he begins by saying, الرجل راعي وهو مسؤول عن أهل بيته وعن بيته عن أهل بيته. And then he says, وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ وَهِيَ مَسْؤُولَةٌ عَنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ زَوْجِهَا. Right? This is the language of our Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So if we're going to go back to the lillah quotient, we have to look at the prophetic language when he says that the man is a responsible shepherd and he is responsible for ahli bayti, for the dwellers of his family and his home. And then the woman is a shepherd and she is responsible for the ahl of the bayt of zawjiha, the responsible for the dwellers of her husband's home. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is establishing a type of normativity. And we, as modern Muslims, have to understand this. Allah lam yusharri' illa li maslahatina. Allah has not given sharia except for our collective welfare. Allah knows men and He knows women. And He knows what He wants men to be doing and He knows what He wants women to be doing. Right? So for example, when it comes to employment and work, this is on a principled level now. You have to understand, we're talking up here. When you allow this to trickle down into the details of people's lives, like what's that, Palinko, whatever that game is. Anyway, who cares? When this trickles down, what's that game, man?
What?
You know what I'm talking about? Listen. Tetris. Tetris. Whatever, man. It was a famous game on Price is Right, okay? Anyway, no one knows what I'm talking about. I feel alone right now.
The Price is Right?
What do you say? Palenko. See, these guys are on. Thank you. Thank you. You represent strong today. Get him on the top of the marriage list. So when we come, what was I saying? Oh, Palenko, yeah, yes. So when it starts to trickle down, so we're talking up here. When it trickles down into people's lives, it's going to manifest differently. right? Meaning, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, and the Prophet ﷺ teaches about work and employment, this is a function of a duty and a responsibility upon a man. Work is not in the language of privilege, which is a very modern, secular, humanist, capitalistic notion. Work is freedom, work is a privilege, work is this. That type of language is not emanating from the Sharia. That's not how we speak about work. Work is, if you want to term it something, and I'm going to use a lot of poetic license, it's almost like a necessary evil. Work is not nice. Work is something you have to do. It's a burden. You have to get out of your way. You have to drive on Route 80. A'udhu billah. I hate my life when I'm driving on Route 80. Why would anyone want to willingly drive on Route 80, right, and get stuck in that traffic, right? So the point is that it is in our tradition, it is within the framework of a duty and a responsibility that has to be fulfilled. So effectively what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us is that, Ya Ragil, oh man, go out, inta titbahdil. You go out, you work hard. That's why when the Prophet ﷺ saw a man's hands and they were callous, he said, هذه أيدي يحبها الله. When a man, he said, what am I missing back there? These are hands that Allah loves. Why? Because into go out, work. And make your earning so that you can fulfill your duty and responsibility as someone who is قائم على أهل بيتك. Right? So it is a work in particular, because I know this is a huge contentious issue. This is, by the way, not a hukum shar'i on whether or not it is jaiz for a woman to work or not, right? That's a hukum shar'i we can discuss. That's a religious ruling that's applied to a particular act. Can a woman leave her home and go work? And that's been resolved, I think, time and time again. I'm not talking at that level. I'm not talking about permissibility. I'm talking about the ideal circumstance that the Sharia establishes. Yeah, it may be the case. This is why I said, going back to the Palinko example, when it trickles down, it may be that a woman has no choice but to work, right? Because it is a necessity that is upon her now, right? She doesn't have a man who can fulfill that responsibility in her life. Because we live in extremely unfortunate times, really. Like, one of the big parts of this conversation of roles and responsibilities, when we start getting into the weeds of this, is the fact is that the structure of our civilization is very problematic. This hyper-nuclearized situation where you just have two individuals trying to run this massive ship is actually antithetical to human history, right? And many pockets of the world today. You had the idea of a tribe, a village, and this is, I think, where you can talk, perhaps Dr. Zaid can talk about her thesis, and especially in terms of the spirit and the philosophy of custody in Islam, like what hadana means and represents. And I won't say much, I'll let her share about that because she can talk much more intelligently about it. But we live in times where you have this new age concept of two individuals, who are nuclearized in a space, atomized in a space, disconnected from a village of support, of love, of aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings who can be there to share in the burdens and the responsibilities. It was very simple. Men would go out, hunt, gather, whatever, pillage, sacrifice, put themselves in harm's way, and women would stay home and fulfill a particular duty and responsibility. It was, by the way, a very simple arrangement. For all these centuries, you think they were talking about like, well, how come you get to go hunt? That's what happens in Disney movies, not in human history. Do you understand what I'm talking about? I'm not, like, wallahi al-azim, I actually want us to be very sincere about this. It's a simple enterprise. It's very practical, very functional. Go out, do that. I'll do this. Well, alhamdulillah, right? And it works. It works. It's not like no one is going to be entered into their grave with their titles at work, right? Yeah, sometimes we get tantalized by these, like, okay, you're senior manager partner of I don't know what. They don't call you that as you're going into the grave, right? They don't say ahlan wa sahlan. Like, they don't say that. Doctora, they don't do that, right? Some of us think that, but that's not going to happen. It means it is effervescent in its essence. It just withers away into nothingness. So I think that just in terms of getting into the weeds of this, when it comes to roles and responsibilities, yes, there is an authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon the man because of a responsibility that He placed on his shoulder. And then the woman has a duty and a responsibility in the auspices of that reality, right? And then I don't want to keep on
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Yasir. I did want to add a few things, to what you mentioned, and I guess one of the things you've beautifully articulated the concept of qawama in a way that I think could be digestible by both genders. So jazakallah khair for that. And I think one of the challenges in processing some of this content and terminology is that people tend to deal with it from the standpoint of reality. Well, what do you mean the guy is supposed to lead? Do you know the guys that are around me? They're absolutely horrid human beings. The guy that I have to deal with is a narcissist. He's an absolute control freak. And sometimes when we start dealing with the content of our deen through the lens of reality, things get lost in the details that are around us. And I really think it's really important to, take that in. But when we digest it through the prophetic model and the Prophet ﷺ and how he was with the people in his home, I think that they will be so much closer to our understandings and our sensibilities. And I urge everyone to really consider it through that light. I think the other thing that goes into it, Mawlana Sheikh Yasir, is when we're talking about rights, brothers and sisters, it's really important to understand that marriage can never be processed through the lens of rights, requirements, obligations, the bare minimals of what is allowed and what is forbidden. No, that's a recipe, just like Zaid gave earlier with the Excel sheet example. That's a recipe for a failed marriage, brothers and sisters. When you're talking about a successful marriage, you don't talk about rights. You talk about, or I should say you don't talk about the responsibilities of the other, the responsibilities of the other. But rather, you do it through the lens of ihsan. What should I be doing? What can I do to possibly make this marriage of ours benevolent, successful, upon compassion, upon mercy? That's the terminology that the Quran uses. Because when it becomes black and white like that, what do I have to do? What does he have to do? Then it takes it far away from the Quranic expression of وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He made between you compassion and mercy. So that's the second point that I wanted to make, or the third point I should say. And then the other one, since the question was asked, what are the responsibilities of women? What are the responsibilities of men? It's really important to note this, that Sharia gives us guidelines. It doesn't spell out what must be done to every degree. A lot of that is subject to interpretation. There's a great deal of subjectivity to this. Someone mentioned culture not too long ago, but to be honest with you, we're all influenced by culture. There's a toxic element in culture, but there is an element in culture that each one of us embraces, whether your culture is American culture or Palestinian culture or Desi culture or whatever it might be. And people have embraced those realities as long as it doesn't violate the deen. It's okay to live your life according to that, whatever it might be. Now, if you're stemming from the American culture, you might not have any problem with a guy doing laundry or cooking or doing something of the sort. Some other guys would be, that's so feminine, and that's like emasculating. What do you mean I have to clean and do laundry? And some guys, that's how they think, But, is there really any rights and wrongs? No, we have an ideal example in Rasulullah ﷺ that teaches us selflessness. But is there any right or wrong in the sense that men should not do work within the home, women should not do work outside the home? No, this is all subject to culture. Again, but we know from the Prophet ﷺ's example that he was in the constant service of his family, كان يرقع ثوبه ويخسف نعله. The Prophet ﷺ would sew his clothing. He would fix his shoes when they get wear and tear. That's the Prophet. That promotes a culture of ihsan, because if you want to get, you better be someone who gives. Wallah alam. Those are the 4 points I'd add.
I want to say we are 5 siblings. 4 of us are married, and we are all in traditional marriages. My older sister, my older brother, myself, my younger sister, and there's a 5th sister who's not married yet. We're all in traditional marriages. They all look very different. What she's doing, she's working, she's working, she's not working, how they organize their lives, what happens inside the home, who does what, chores, dishes, this, that, the other. It actually is very different in our 4 households. So this is also to Sheikh Osama's that we don't have very, very specific guidelines of who exactly is going to be doing what. There is flexibility, and you're going to work through these things with your spouse. But however, we all share a mega structure where it's clear, that ultimately who is responsible for what in a very ultimate way. But on a day-to-day basis, it does not have to feel constricting. I think that's the fear that a lot of girls have. I mean, I have a younger relative, someone who was telling me once, she was saying, oh, I don't want to go from having to listen to my father to having to listen to my husband. Like, what's the point? I don't even want to get married if I'm going to go from my parents' household telling me what to do to my husband's household telling me what to do. So it was a I feel, very dark understanding of what actually it's going to look like in a marriage. But I think sometimes we even project our resentment of authority because of our households. If authority felt oppressive in your home, tyrannical in your home, you're very likely to resent the concept of authority, period. And you don't like the idea that your husband has qiwama. What is this? He has this degree of authority. What does this mean? Because you already have a bad experience and a bad taste in your mouth with authority. Who knows how was your father like at home? And by the way, being controlling is not a principle thing. I think many of us have experienced potentially being in a household where there's someone who was very controlling, maybe the person who had authority. Being controlling, again, is not a principle thing. It's a nafsani problem that some men have, sometimes some women have, right? Domineering mothers exist as well. Domineering fathers exist as well. But other than that, I think we have to understand sometimes where our problem with authority is coming from. And the other thing I would add, that I really want the younger ladies to remember, there's no such thing as freedom, okay? I want to be free. I can't wait to leave my house so I can be free and make my own decisions and do what I want to do. There's no such thing. Freedom is a myth. It's in the movies. Nobody is free. Everybody has to listen to their boss. Okay? Everybody has to follow rules. We don't even choose what we wear, by the way. The difference between, I used to say this when I used to give talks about hijab some while back. The only difference between a girl who wears hijab and a girl who doesn't wear hijab is that they listen to different sources of authority. That's it. We have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a source of authority who tells us to wear hijab. They have the fashion industry that tells them what to wear. Nobody's going out in an 18th century puffy dress with puffy, why? Right? We all follow somebody. We are all following somebody. Nobody's not a follower. Let's get comfortable with that. Nobody is not a follower. It is just a matter of what the choice of authority is. We need good authorities because there's no such thing as freedom. Really nobody's free. Pay We're all human beings. We live in society. We follow norms, what to wear, what to dress, what to say, where to go, what to study, what to pursue. You didn't come up with those norms yourself. You were born into a culture and you're following norms. So let's just be a little critical of freedom, following norms, what it means to follow, what it means to have an authority. I think we need to deconstruct all these things so we can get a little more comfortable with these ideas.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Jazakallah khair. I'm going to press one more time, and I'm going to hold the shuyukh to it this time.
We answered the question,
I
ya
love
Sheikh.
the conversation that has come up. Tfaddal ya akhi, go ahead.
I just want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but I really feel like the net of all this is just ego and pride at the end of the day, from both gender, whether it's female or male. Because if you really look at the bigger perspective of things, it's like, whether it's choosing to work or not to work, if you look at the root of the cause, it's always, or the guy wanting to feel authority, and you really feel that, you start thinking about it, it all comes down to like really then the ego and pride. And I feel like that's what causes the damage, because if, for example, all the men give a perspective where they appreciate every single woman that puts into a household, I don't think the problem of a woman being a housewife is even an issue. But the problem is, it's not even being solved because it's not appreciated in the way it should be, which I think it comes down to ego and pride. I'm providing, you should be caring, right? But at the end of the day, it's not like that. The factory without workers, it won't produce. So it's kind of like the same thing. And that's my perspective, but you guys can correct me.
I do want, you can comment on the brother's point, but before you do that, or while you're doing that, or after you do that, I am going to ask. Like, I understand what Sheikh Osama said, what Dr. Zaid said. In the practical reality, there's negotiation, there's everyone's household may have a slightly different flavor to it. But are there fundamental responsibilities that a husband has to live up to and fundamental responsibilities that a wife has to live up to? These were the most popular questions that were asked tonight, and I don't want to leave without getting a clear answer on that thing. Are there fundamental responsibilities that each spouse has to live up to?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned in terms of the husband, the principal thing, which is when it comes to foundational responsibilities and duties, there is a responsibility in terms of authority to ensure that the governance of this home is in the direction that is most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is on the responsibility of the shoulders of the husband, meaning that the deen of the home, right, the religious quality and the integrity of the home is a responsibility on the man to ensure that Islam is the religion that is abided by, that governs the affairs of the home. That's a responsibility that they're going to be asked for, about, and accounted for on the Day of Judgment. That's important to understand. The earning, right, the shelter, the protection, the food, the basic health that's needed for the welfare of the wife and the children, that is a responsibility and a duty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask the man about in terms of providing that for his family. So these are very well articulated and clearly established normative practices for the man from the place of duty and responsibility. Now, from the place of the wife, right, there is a responsibility and a duty of abiding by that reality, right? There's an abiding of that reality, meaning that I recognize my husband as an authority, right? That this is from the Sharia of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that this is a recognition to this authority, right? And then in the language of the Prophet, that the ri'ayah of the woman comes in the space of ahli bayti zawjiha. So you have a responsibility and a duty towards the home, right, that this man should ideally be providing. Now, in terms of if we're going to talk about, we need to talk about we have to put a list and say vacuuming, dishes, مش عارف إيه. The Sharia doesn't mention vacuums, right? However, there are practical realities, and pay attention to what I'm about to say here. I try to be very practical about this. I agree with what the brother said. If this becomes a thing of ego and pride, we're doomed for. I agree 1,000%. This is just practicality. Things have to get done. right? That's all it's about. This is not a status thing. We don't need to put this on Instagram, right? We don't need to a man doesn't, it's not like something that I have to talk about. It's just something you have to practically do because people have to be fed, clothes has to be washed, right? Cars have to be fixed, garbage needs to be taken out. There's just practical realities.
Yeah.
Now, in those terms, what we see that based on this foundational structure that the Sharia establishes, there are practical realities that just transpire from that. So yes, it is the case that you will find that the standard normative practice is that the woman exists within the space of the home and as a critical caretaker in that space. And I want you to talk, I would love my wife to speak about the concept of hadana, right? And why this is something that is bestowed upon women, because this language of hadana, kafala, is also very critical, right? In the sense of understanding and imagining my identity in this space. When we learn in our Sharia that the woman has hadana and the man has kafala, what does that mean practically speaking? Because what is a hadina? Do you want to just talk a little bit about this? And then you can come back to me, inshallah. I think this is very critical in terms of imagining roles and responsibilities. Are we getting into good details here? Okay, because I feel your pressure, man.
I think also, I mean, before I mention hadana and wilaya, I think maybe some of you are wondering, what does this actually look like? You know, when you are in Islamic traditional marriage, I mean, obviously you've seen your homes, right? So we have all kinds of ideas of what does this look like. But I guess I just want to put it out there that every day you're just living your life as a wife. You know, you're doing here, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're taking the kids here, extracurriculars, whatever it is you're doing, going places, meeting people, seeing friends, visiting your family. You're living your life. It's not that, I think some people have this idea that when we say the husband is the authority, that everything has to be run by him. I don't know who has that idea. That's obviously not what it actually life looks like practically. But I do want to say, however, just for full disclosure, that there are major life decisions in a household that eventually need to be decided by somebody. And in a healthy marriage, there has to be shura. There has to be consultation between husband and wife. But eventually, there's a decision that needs to be made about specific things. For example, where you're going to move to, housing, whatever it is, right? And that decision has to end somewhere. It ends with a husband. So I want to put that out there, that I think we play a role as well as supporters of our husband in trying to be encouraging them to live up to authority. By the way, I think our welfare as women is maximized when we have men with healthy authority. Not insecure men with controlling issues. That plays out very differently. Insecure men with controlling issues plays out very differently than men who are confident in his decision making and who have healthy authority. And I think that's what men are, by and large, looking for, because right now we're seeing all these trends as well in society of men looking for other men who represent, power and authority, and sometimes they look for it in unhealthy places, right? Because we are all looking to realize ourselves as women and men, and that's a whole other story. Now, Sheikh wants me to mention Hadana and Wilaya very briefly. Women in Sharia are given, in the event of a divorce or the event of one of the death of the parents, they're given child custody. Mothers have a primary right to child custody of their children. Men have a primary right to the child guardianship, to the guardianship of the children. Wilaya is for men, Hadana is for women. And I think the reason why, Sheikh Yasser wants me to mention this is because Hadana is not only given to the mother, but it's also given to the maternal grandmother and the maternal aunt, and a lot of other women in your household are responsible for the caregiving of a child. I think one of the reasons why the experience of motherhood and caretaking in the home can be so miserable, and I do think it can be miserable, is because we're doing it alone. And it was never meant to be this lonely endeavor of a woman caring for the house all by herself, killing herself, taking care of the children with no help whatsoever. We know what that feels like. It's very, very difficult. And we are, I mean, inshallah, I hope next time we see you, I really hope, I want to have this conversation about building villages and building communities, because we need one another. And otherwise, even the traditional Islamic marriage model is hardly sustainable if we have no support.
Yeah.
Right? If we have no support. And that's not how the Sharia envisioned childcare and how it envisioned the care of a family.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a communal thing, and it can be done, by the way. It doesn't have to be back in the village. We can step up for one another as women and help each other as women, and we will find that it's much more sustainable that way.
So, if I may, Sheikhna, I think that there's a lot of things that we need to pay attention that are variable based on circumstance. You know, I think when it comes to even like caring for the children, you'll find that in the books of fiqh, educating children falls as an initial responsibility upon the father. And then if that role is not fulfilled by that means, then that's a lot of coffee, mashallah. Educating the children is a primary responsibility of the father, as they mention in the books of fiqh. And, imagining that role through our lens, you'll find that often fathers take on very limited tarbiyah roles and become basically like the money bank. And it becomes a has very negative effects on the upbringing of the children. But in actuality, you'll find that for all of these responsibilities, there's a pragmatic approach in Sharia. If the father doesn't do it, then the next person that's responsible before Allah Azza wa Jal for educating the children is the mother. And if she doesn't do it, then both of them are sinful before Allah Azza wa Jal if they don't teach the child about the Prophet ﷺ, about Iman, about the foundations of the deen. They're both sinful for it. When it comes to even providing, there's a very minimal obligation in terms of Sharia when it comes to financial obligation. Because sometimes, again, if I observe what was said through the lens of reality, I might get confused. Well, what are you telling me? My wife has the right to work, yet I'm responsible for all the financials. Does that mean I need to buy whatever house, whatever car is desired and kill myself financially? Does Sharia require me to do that? No, the obligation is actually very minimal. But then there becomes this huge realm where husband and wife can negotiate what type of lifestyle do we want to live. Do we want to live a more luxurious lifestyle, in which case we would become a dual income household, or do we want to live on simple means and preserve that traditional reality of marriage? So that becomes a really big realm where we could negotiate. But what Sharia is not going to allow is for someone to be unreasonable to the point where it causes oppression to either side, either to the men's side or the woman's side. Even when it comes to the idea of custody in case of divorce, you'll find that a lot of this is also circumstantial. That the defaults are, as we heard from Dr. Zaid, but then circumstance would come to fine-tune that to preserve the maslahah and the best interest of the child. That if we have circumstance where perhaps a mother may be unfit to care for the children, then that's going to be dealt with in a certain way, shar'an. If we have circumstance where the father is in an inappropriate way, because we have to deal with this, by the way, in many situations. Many sisters come to us with the reality that, hey, my father growing up was always very abusive, he's not very religious, and now I'm getting married, and now he's trying to refuse every guy that comes my way, and he's making all kinds of threats that I'm not going to get married. Does Sharia allow that type of reality where you have a person who has a rubber stamp, just because I am this person in your life, that means I get to decide on X, Y, and Z? No. That's the beautiful thing about our deen, brothers and sisters. It's a guideline and it's customizable based on your circumstance. If there's a guy who's oppressive, he becomes unfit for wilaya. It goes to the next person in line, and if that person is also unfitting, it goes to the next person after that. So if you're that person who is in a situation where you're alarmed, what are you saying, Yani? Why are you establishing all this kind of authority? You don't know how men are going to use what you're saying or how women are going to use what you're saying. No, there's a solution and remedy for all those variables in Sharia, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Wallahu a'lam.
I mean, barakallahu feekum, Shaykhna. So, I mean, that's the point is here that we're trying to establish kind of a skeletal model, some of the foundational principles. But like I said, the proverbial, angels in the details. We're not, no devils here, just angels in the details, right? Because it does play out differently. Like, circumstances will absolutely impact some degree of normative practice. Now, the reason why I was emphasizing about the hadana point, because it gives a profound spirit into the essence of roles and responsibilities. Because if you think of the idea of a hadina, what does the word hadana come from? What does it come from? Huh? Hudun, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Huh? It's like a hug, it's a care. So literally in Sharia, the warm hug, tender care of the child, right, and the space belongs to the woman. That is the essence of what the Sharia expects of the responsibility of the woman in the space. That's why when the divorce happens, the hudun goes to the woman, not the whole child. This is important to understand, because modern custody law, Western custody law, says what? Now this child is a ward of this woman. No. That's not how Sharia conceives of it. Because the man still has a critical role of what? Of wilaya and kafala. Those are practical roles that still have to be fulfilled. A kafil is someone who is responsible for this child from a list of, finances, education, and other technical responsibilities. So, but I think that framing from within the Sharia also gives us insight into normativity. This is what I'm saying. We're extracting from our Sharia, from our sources, roles and responsibilities, right? So the Sharia, and we can go into far more detail about this regard, but the Sharia does endorse a model of the man that works and is the breadwinner, and the woman who is the caretaker, right? The hadina. That is the essence of that reality. Now, for practical purposes, when you start getting into homes, we use the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The mention that Sheikh Usama made about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to tend to some of his own affairs. That's true, but we have to understand the context of the Prophet's life. Like, we can't look at things in isolation. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 1,001 responsibilities and duties that he was managing as a prophet of Allah, as a leader of a community, as a man who was married to multiple women concurrently, right? So he had many responsibilities, right, to many people. And so the standard for any one of his homes was that the woman was taking care, the lion's share of those responsibilities. Now the Prophet ﷺ was a beautiful man, and he was not a dictator. He didn't come in and tell her, take off my shoes or whatever and give me, that's not how he behaved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was a man of rahmah. This is, so that when we look at how the Prophet ﷺ, when he was doing those things, he was doing it purely from a space of rahmah and humility. He wasn't doing it because the Excel sheet said so, which is the problem that we have today. You understand that? Like, Prophet ﷺ wasn't taking care of his na'al because, like, the negotiation that was made in the beginning said, well, you're going to care for your own shoes, I'm not going to do that. No, this was something that, regularly speaking, would be tended to by his wife, but he fulfilled it in that moment from a place of rahmah and mercy. And so and that's the point. The point is that it's very okay to find yourself, for example, as a man, from a place of rahmah and mercy, tending to these affairs, right? There's no problem in that regard. You see your wife, especially now when we get into the practical challenge of the new age relationship where you're living in a nuclear family. Yeah, the man is gonna have to step up, more in that regard, right? Yeah, even if you're out working all day and you're tired, it doesn't matter because your wife is overburdened at home, right? In an exaggerated way, by the way. It's unnatural, the degree of burdens that a woman has to manage all alone in the home. As my wife said, historically you would have this village of women around you that could support and take care. There's villages, there's cultural practices in Africa until today that when a woman gives birth, she does not lift a finger for 40 days. Because the sisters, the cousins, the aunts, they're taking care of everything. Food preparation, cleanliness, whatever is needed. She just has to rest her body and nurse the child when the child is needed. And then all the other women are taking care of it. That's a beautiful model that we need to consider reconstructing and having some, imagination around. Right? So we have to be careful to reduce marriage.
Sheikh, can I just say that that's possible because those 30 women who are taking care of her are not full-time workers?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just put that out there. When all of our women are working 9-to-5 jobs or in college and doing extracurricular activities and fellowships and internships and all of that, no one can help one another. So let's also think about the effect on our community as a whole when everybody is working and how we all suffer from that. There's no one to visit and bring you soup when you just gave birth or you're sick. Everybody has to get to work. So what are we doing to one another?
Sheikhna, before the question, just a quick thing. Embracing those roles is what you mean, right? I think, and I think you'd agree with me, I think we need to abandon the language of obligation when it comes to the subject of marriage. Like even that example of the Prophet ﷺ doing things in the household and the lion's share being taken care of by Ummahat al-Mu'mineen. That was a reality they willingly embraced, not something that they were obligated to do shar'an. Correct?
It's hard. Huh? No. So yes and no. I would say yes and no to that. Yes and no in the sense of, because the language of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ وَهِيَ مَسْؤُولَةٌ عَنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ زَوْجِهَا. There is a coloring of obligation, a coloring. Now, is she religiously obligated to wash a dish? No, that's not a hukum shar'i in that regard.
Yeah, because he's also ra'i.
Precisely. So, but what I'm indicating is that there is a religious connotation that is applicable here in terms of roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
The practicality of how it plays out, it may be altered and shifted based on circumstances. But I'm talking about that the Sharia and its spirit, it does produce a reality that establishes, like I said, that roles and responsibilities are divvied up for the most part in this way. But it's not in any way, shape, or form a function of. Now, yes, in the modern world, which is a very unfortunate development, is that the one who's outside is above the one who's inside. And that's a real disaster. That's a disease. That is an absolute falsity. There is no idea, no conception in Sharia or Islam that the one who's outside is better than the one inside. Right? Not at all. And we have to also be careful of the cultural imperative that we are carrying as Americans. Because this is a cultural reality that is established here. There has been a complete dismissive narrative around the home, motherhood. It's been completely dismissed and insulted and desecrated. And so much so that it's become something that women have an aversion to. I don't like this for myself. And so, but then reality kicks in. We want marriage, we want life, we want relationships. So a big part of this conversation is scaling back and imagining alternate possibilities. that could be for us. Like where does happiness lie for a Muslim woman today? Where does happiness lie for a Muslim man today? That's a question that we have to actually now renegotiate. Because the standard model right now that is being pursued, like the way guys are being programmed and the way women are being programmed to pursue happiness, is categorically faulty in my belief.
Yeah.
Like it's very problematic. You have a lot of men who are becoming narcissistic in themselves and like self-centered and self-absorbed because of narratives that are out there. Also men who are becoming increasingly insecure, overly emotional because of narratives that are out there and realities that have transpired. There's a lot of problems in that regard, and it's causing a lot of harm. But there's also realities playing out in the world of women, right? It is like this whole narrative that has made it that like women are the center. You are a goddess, your body's your temple, right? This is, like, listen, this is real language, and it exists. And you have to be a shiro, and you have to slay it, and you have to I don't know what. Like there's this really heavy language that is like so aggrandizing of women, right? That women are internalizing as well, and it's very destructive. So we also have to be careful, because see, all of this is playing into the narrative. If I am, as a man coming into a place, I'm very insecure, very skittish, I'm not chivalrous, I'm not honorable, I'm not sacrificial. I'd rather just sit there and play video games and like carry heavy duties and responsibilities. Then a lot falls apart, when a man is not being a man.
Yeah.
And it's very ugly when a man is not a man, right? And I know a lot of people are suffering because of the quality of manhood that's out there.
Yeah.
And the same applies, sorry Maulana, the same applies for women, is that women have to come to terms with what a woman is and what it means to be a woman and what it represents and what the beauty of a woman is. Like these are all things that I believe have been so thoroughly corrupted in the modern discourse, right? About the essence of men, the essence of women, how we truly complete one another, right? And that, yeah, there are things that men are just more capable of doing, and there are things that women are more capable. Doesn't mean that, one is, somehow deficient and the other one's capable. Has nothing to do with that. It's just a matter of tawafuq, completing of one another. Right? Wallahu alam.
So I did want to mention one thing about just a response, if you don't mind. So I totally agree with that, Maulana. I think the reason why I asked the question was I think that I perceive the reality that we see from the Prophet ﷺ's example with Ummahat al-Mu'mineen and with our Islamic tradition are healthy cultural manifestations. And I think it's, if we contextualize it like that, then I'll be able to see that what the woman's actually doing in that space when embracing this role is actually a form of charity to herself and to the household, that actually engenders a spirit of benevolence between husband and wife within the family. And I think, framing it like that helps address certain questions that might come up. Well, is a woman sinful if she doesn't cook for her husband for that day? I would stress to both men and women, hey, you know what? Abandon the language of obligation. That's not what's going to make you happy. That's not what's going to make your marriage successful. What you should be positioning it as is, well, how can I express love to my other through the role that has come up in my reality through natural ways, right? So, I understand that there are certain things that naturally and practically come about as they are, but sometimes these things are weaponized. And of course, from a Shar'i standpoint, it can never be misconstrued as something that is required and obligated.
Yeah,
right? Actually, they actually say this specifically. But by the way, guys, not to disappoint you, they say, all four schools actually say this, that there's no Shar'i mandate that requires a woman to cook in her home. That's the opinion of the four schools, actually. But, she's going to order out. بس but the whole point here is that doesn't mean it's a green light. Hey, no one cook anymore. That's it. I'm not required to do it. Let's abandon the language of obligation and say, you know what? Let's actually build love in our home. And this is how I could do it. This is how you could do it.
Yeah,
right?
I just want to, I also just, I guess, want to emphasize something, that when I speak about religion, and I speak about Sharia, and I speak about like the spirit of Islam, the language of obligation is one dimension. Like, you know, a big part of my teaching philosophy through prophetic living and through all of the teaching that I do is about Hadith Jibreel. And Hadith Jibreel is a paradigm that tells us our deen. The famous hadith when the Prophet ﷺ was saying with Sayyidina Jibreel, and he said, what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan, what is the hour? And then at the end the Prophet ﷺ says, this was Jibreel, he came to teach you your deen. So when we talk about deen, we're not just talking about the technical legalistic considerations.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, religion is broader than that. That's why when I invoke religion, when I say yes and no, Maulana, about the obligation is to say no, there is a religious factoring in consideration. Ihsan plays into that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And then,
That's all
absolutely,
I'm saying. Like, Ihsan plays into this space. So when I choose to sacrifice sleep, it's not because it's an obligation or a duty. If my child is sick and not feeling well, and one of us has to get up and oh, I'm so tired, please Habib, just عشان خاطري مش عارف ايه كذا. Ihsan is what dictates in that moment. It's not the technical letter of the law, right? That's going to dictate behavior in that moment. And by the way, the language of the Quran and Sunnah, when it comes to marriages, is all about ihsan.
Yeah.
Very little about law. Very little about the legalistic considerations. By that, what I mean is, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala جَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places between you unconditional love and compassion and mercy, لِتَسْكُنُوا, so you can find tranquility. That's all ihsani language. That is intrinsic to the marital consideration. And that's Islamic. That's my point. Right? That is Sharia and Islam as our tradition. When I choose to, from the place of humility and generosity and kindness, to prepare a beautiful meal, that's coming from a place of ihsan.
Yeah.
Not some lowly, like, indentured servant. Right? That's not how Sharia conceives of this. And so, you know, I think we've clarified for the most part, but go ahead.
So we can feel the room. We know everyone's tired. Barakallah feekum. I think it's been a very, very enriching night, alhamdulillah. But we always need like 3 or 4 more after each AMA. So we're aware, alhamdulillah, that we've gotten to 3 questions, alhamdulillah. But there were 2 sisters who had their hands up. I want to make sure to give them an opportunity to get their questions in, and then I think we have to wrap up for the night. I'll give each of the panelists, inshallah, a chance to say a final word before we do, but I want to give the sisters an opportunity to ask their questions. Go ahead, the sister in the back first.
So this is like a comment or like a statement about what you were saying before about like 9 to 5 jobs and all that stuff, specifically for Dr. Hanan. And I feel like that we have to be a little bit more careful the way we talk about things like that, because I feel like there is a really blurry line. Because it's like, you know, we're like so focused on these 9 to 5 jobs, it's kind of like, oh, okay, then, you know, and then eventually we're going to sacrifice it anyway. So it's like, then why do we educate our women? Why do we go to school? Why do we work on ourselves? You know, it's like, you know, why
Jazakallahu khairan. I appreciate for that perspective, and I think it's so wonderful to hear back from you, because sometimes you need to be aware of how, like, what are all the different ways in which something can be heard. So I really appreciate it, and I thank you for that comment. I think something I would say, you know, when I had my first child, and a few of my friends had their first child, we came into this existential crisis. I don't know if any one of you here has friends or sisters who are going through their first pregnancy or going through their first child. When you stay home with a child and, you know, over a prolonged period of time, I heard some of my friends say, oh my God, I feel like I'm losing myself. Like, who am I anymore? Because I was this person, and now I'm like this radically different person. I think I mean, this is a conversation we need to have over a prolonged period of time. What I would say is that maybe we have to be a little critical perhaps of the language of, I don't need to sacrifice myself or all of myself for my family, or my husband, my children. What is your self? You know, what is this self that we talk about? So we're born with a self, and we're constantly building that self. And I am aware that when we are growing up or single, we have all these ideas of what we want to become, and we shape that self in a particular way. I think that with marriage, it's not that that self is being sacrificed. I think that that self continues to shift and evolve and change. You're still building. I don't like the language of I'm sacrificing myself and my dreams, as though your dreams had been fixed up until the age of 22 before you got married. Why? Why do we have this idea by the age of 21 or whatever age, right, that I am going to become so and so and so, and that's yourself, and those are your dreams? Why can't they continue to evolve? Because the way in which that self was shaped and fashioned was done under particular circumstances that are not your circumstances anymore. Okay? So I like that you're saying, you know, mashallah, you're very thoughtful, you're thinking with flexibility, you're saying, oh, you know, maybe I'm going to become a teacher, and this is going to allow me the flexibility I need, which I think is wonderful. Teachers, mashallah, provide such a crucial service to our community, our educators, our teachers. I would never want to belittle the work that they do, and I don't think that all of them have to stay at home by any means. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I think a more useful kind of way to think about it is that you adapt to your circumstances, that you're flexible, but also that yourself is going to continue to evolve. Because where we are hurt is where we have fashioned a particular self with particular dreams, and they don't longer match our circumstances. That's where the pain comes from. And I'm not worried about your husband or your kids necessarily. I'm worried about you. You are going to hurt the moment that your circumstances shift and the self you have fashioned for 21 years no longer meets that reality. You're going to suffer. You're going to be in pain. And I think the way that you can come out of that is by continuing to shape that self, by being flexible, by saying, you know what, I had that dream, but maybe it doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe I can, redirect here, redirect there, continue to contribute in a different way. There's not just one way to be happy or to be fulfilled. It doesn't have to be, the only way I can be fulfilled is if I am the surgeon I dreamed I would become when I was 18 years old, or between the ages of 12 and 21, I dreamed I would be the surgeon. Maybe it doesn't meet your circumstances anymore. What, are you going to suffer and be miserable because it's too tough now? Or continuously be torn between two situations? Adapt, change, mold your dreams, keep on growing. Isn't that what life is about? So I don't like the language of sacrificing. I like the language of growth, development, flexibility. And there's ample room for our women, mashallah, to provide service to our community. It's not either or. So yeah, Jazakallah khair for your comment. I mean, so much more can be said about this, but maybe next time.
I just want to say something. There's a point that the sister mentioned about people can cherry pick. And I just want to highlight that because I think it's a very important point that she's talking to. nothing, like if we're going to treat these conversations, like, because she's saying something which is, I'm concerned that people are going to hear something, take that, and then weaponize it. If people are here to weaponize what we're saying, leave. Or stay and be taught. Because this is not about weaponizing anything. I've said this 1,000 times sitting right here, right? This is not a battle. This is not a battle. We are in this together. We need to figure out how to make this a beautiful and harmonious thing. We're talking about complicated things, right? Because they're very publicly charged right now. It's very sensitive. And that's why I said in the beginning, when my opening remarks, I said what? We have to take the spirit of Sayyiduna Musa here. We're all trying to learn. This is not like, we're not scoring points. I hate that whole TikTok reality. It's the most ugly thing, because a lot of people are colored by those conversations on TikTok, right? Well, let me tell you. And it's like, how do I score a point for men? And how do I score a point for women? That's garbage. It's categorical garbage. This is a prophetic enterprise. It's very beautiful. It's very merciful. It's very loving. It's very kind. It's very sacrificial. It's about attaining the existential reality of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the idea of what we're talking about here is that this is far greater than us as individuals. Right? By the way, we're all just small little pawns in the divine project. Like, it's not us. It's Allah, and then we are trying to negotiate the divine reality in the manner most pleasing to Him. That's all this is about. And how do we maximize our dunyawi, but more critically, our ukhrawi welfare? I think that should be the spirit. So we certainly have not covered everything. There are so many details to get into. We need to have 20 more of these to start really scratching the surface, because like I said, there's a lot of opinions in this room. There's a lot of perspectives. But if everyone's just on the edge of their seat waiting to hear what they want to hear, we're going nowhere.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a constructive conversation where we can grow collectively. Because honestly, listen, I'm someone who is very open to talking about the most sensitive and complicated topics. It doesn't unsettle me. I don't care about being validated or canceled. I don't care about that public discourse. I care about us figuring out a way to truly live as a beautiful collective community in loving surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's just come to this space with that spirit every time. Sometimes we're going to disagree, agree, push back, and that's beautiful. Wallahi, Zakillah khair for your thoughts and your reflections. And I want to hear more of that. And I hope, inshallah, next time, we can
absolutely
do that.
Absolutely, Shaykhna.
Yeah, but I have to. You don't want to anymore? Okay. Oh yeah, I don't think we're getting to any other question tonight, inshallah. Unfortunately, I'll give. We're going to end in a second, inshallah. I do want to say one thing that all three, Dr. Zaid and Sheikh Yassin, Sheikh Osama mentioned it, but I think it needs to be reiterated again after this last back and forth very briefly. This is not specific about one gender or the other. I think in general, the fact that so many of us couple our identity to work and money-making endeavors or some random external goal that we've set for ourselves, I think has been a very damaging reality on both sides of this aisle. Right? So it's a very damaging reality to all of us involved here, and I think so much of the language today was about, they've been circling that and not going directly into it because it's not the topic, but it keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, because there's always a conversation about sacrifice, and it always seems to be around this issue, sacrificing my time at work or my time on this project that I wanted to reach. And I don't know when or where that became the end-all be-all of who we are as a person or what our value is. So I do think a future session, inshallah, does need to go in-depth into that. I'm going to give this brother the last question, inshallah, then I'll give each of our scholars, inshallah, a chance to speak, and we'll end there.
Yeah, so Jazakallah khair for all everything you guys said. I know it's really tiring, so Jazakallah khair. I just want to say, I feel like as a mass majority, we all miss the main goal of marriage, which is essentially to raise righteous children to also obey Allah, and for us to get sadaqah when we're in the grave, and for us to continue the righteousness after we die. And I feel like, so there's no construct way of going about how a marriage life should be. It's just whatever meets that goal, khalas, that's it. So whether it be, she works or she doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. Whatever focuses on raising righteous children. And I feel like the traditional way does suit that the best. And especially because it's been working for not even hundreds, thousands of years. So why try to fix something that's broken? When most people that shoot for this type of lifestyle, they themselves came from this type of lifestyle. So in a way, it's kind of selfish that you're saying, yeah, I grew up like that, but I don't want my kids having that type of lifestyle.
Exactly.
Now, and I feel like that's just the core crux that we're missing the goal of marriage. We feel like, all right, I'm gonna get all the benefits of it. I'm gonna go on the dates and stuff, but they don't take care of, like, we miss the point of, like, the struggles and stuff like that, And in my humble opinion, I don't feel like it's a one-sided, like, thing. I feel like the men are really lazy. Like, I've known a lot of brothers that say, I can't work right now because I'm going to school. Do both. And the women, like, it's very, like, they're following a dream that's like a tunnel with a dead end.
Barakallah
It's
feek.
like,
Barakallah feek.
so
And whoever's, I don't know, I don't know who's dating, but just to make it clear.
I hope no one here is doing that.
Oh, date nights. Got you. Okay. I thought you were saying he's like people are just going on the dates like under the guise of marriage. Like, that's no one's okaying that here. I don't know. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah feekum. Dr. Ramzay, do you have anything you want to say, Sheikh Osama? Any last words? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, accept from you all. It was a very long night. I thought it was a very riveting night. I thought it was a very enriching night. Alhamdulillah. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from all of us. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count these 2+ hours as a time of i'tikaf and ibadah for Him.
Ameen.
And inshallah, stay in touch. We will keep in touch with you about the next meeting point. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.